I want to tell you something that changed how I see everything. It's about pleasure, but not in the way you think. What if I told you that most of what we call pleasure isn't actually pleasure at all? What if it's something much darker, much more deceptive? I've spent years watching myself and others chase the same things. The next episode, the perfect bite, the instant notification, the fleeting high. And I started to notice something disturbing. We're all running, but we never seem to arrive. So let me ask you, when did you last feel completely at peace? Not entertained, not stimulated, not distracted, just enough. Because if you're like most people, that moment feels impossibly distant. And there's a reason for that. Today I want to show you what I discovered about pleasure and why understanding this could be the most important thing you ever learn about yourself. Let's start with a moment you'll recognize. You wake up, and before your feet even hit the floor, your hand is already reaching for your phone. Not because something urgent happened while you slept, but because the silence feels too heavy. You scroll. A video makes you chuckle. You feel good for exactly 4 seconds. Then it's gone, and you need another hit, another scroll, another laugh, another anything. Hours disappear. The phone finally goes down. You grab something to eat, not because you're hungry, but because your mouth needs something to do. Then comes that familiar feeling, empty satisfaction. You got what you wanted, but you still want more. This is where my story really begins, because I used to think this was normal. I used to think craving was just part of being human. But then I learned about something psychologists call shadow pleasure. Pleasure that isn't actually pleasurable. Here's what I mean. True pleasure fills you up. False pleasure leaves you hungrier. True pleasure makes you present. False pleasure makes you absent. True pleasure connects you to life. False pleasure disconnects you from yourself. And most of what we chase today, it's the false kind. I remember being 7 years old. I scraped my elbow falling off my bike. I was crying, not just from the pain, but from the shock, the fear. And what did the adults around me do? Don't cry. Here, have some ice cream. Look, your favorite cartoon is on. Stop being sad. Smile. In that moment, I learned something that would shape the next 20 years of my life. Pain is wrong. Feeling is dangerous. And the solution, pleasure. So I became an expert at avoiding discomfort. Bored, scroll. Anxious, eat. Lonely, shop. Angry, binge. Sad, anything but sad. I thought I was taking care of myself. Really, I was slowly forgetting who I was. Because here's what nobody tells you about avoidance. Every time you use pleasure to silence an emotion, you lose a little piece of your ability to feel fully. You become a stranger to your own experience. I started noticing this pattern everywhere. Friends who couldn't eat a meal without their phone. People who needed constant music because silence felt weird. Relationships that fell apart because nobody could just be together without constant stimulation. And I realized we're not pleasure seekers. We're pain avoiders. There's a massive difference. A pleasure seeker enjoys a glass of wine with dinner. A pain avoider needs the wine to get through dinner. A pleasure seeker watches a movie they're excited about. A pain avoider binges shows to avoid thinking. A pleasure seeker has sex because they're connected to their partner. A pain avoider has sex because they're disconnected from themselves. The action looks the same. The motivation is completely different. And the outcome, completely different too. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in real life. I once knew someone who called herself a foodie. She'd post pictures of every meal, talk endlessly about restaurants, plan her day around where to eat next. But when you watched her actually eat, she was always distracted. Phone out, conversation going, mind somewhere else. She wasn't enjoying the food, she was using it to fill time, to create content, to avoid the quiet moments where her thoughts might catch up with her. The food wasn't the problem, the avoidance was. And this is the trap so many of us fall into. We mistake intensity for intimacy. We mistake stimulation for satisfaction. We mistake distraction for happiness. But real pleasure, the kind that actually nourishes you, is often quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand your attention. It doesn't leave you wanting more. Real pleasure is reading a book that changes how you see the world. Real pleasure is a conversation that makes you forget to check the time. Real pleasure is finishing something you thought was impossible. Real pleasure is sitting in silence and realizing you don't need to escape it. But we don't crave this kind of pleasure because it requires something most of us have forgotten how to do. It requires us to be present. And presence is terrifying when you've spent years running from yourself. I want you to try something right now. Put down whatever you're holding. Turn off any background noise. Sit still for exactly 60 seconds. Don't count the time. Just sit. How does that feel? Uncomfortable? Anxious? Like you need to do something, anything. That discomfort, that's not boredom. That's your real self trying to get your attention. That's all the feelings you've been avoiding, finally having space to speak. And instead of listening, most of us reach for the nearest distraction. We've been trained to think that discomfort equals danger, but actually discomfort equals information. Your anxiety is telling you something. Your sadness is pointing to something that matters. Your anger is protecting something valuable. Your loneliness is calling you home to yourself. But when we drown these feelings in false pleasure, we miss the messages they're trying to deliver. I learned this the hard way. For years, I used entertainment like medication. Bad day at work, Netflix, fight with a friend, shopping, feeling stuck in life, food, and it worked. Temporarily. But the problems never went away. They just got louder, and I needed stronger distractions to silence them. Until one day, I couldn't run anymore. Everything I usually used to feel better had stopped working. The shows were boring. The food was tasteless. The shopping was empty. I was forced to sit with myself, and it was terrifying. But it was also the beginning of everything. Because when I stopped running from discomfort, I discovered something incredible. Most of what I was afraid to feel wasn't actually that scary. It was just real. That sadness I'd been avoiding. It was grief for dreams I'd given up on. That anxiety I'd been numbing. It was excitement about possibilities I'd never explored. That anger I'd been eating away. It was power I'd been giving away to others. The feelings weren't the problem, the avoidance was. And once I started listening instead of numbing, everything began to change. I stopped needing constant entertainment. I could eat when I was hungry and stop when I was full. I could have conversations without checking my phone. I could be alone without feeling lonely. Not because I'd become some enlightened being, but because I'd remembered how to be present with myself. This is what I want for you, not a life without pleasure. That would be colorless and sad, but a life where pleasure is chosen, not compulsive. Where joy is deep, not just intense. Where satisfaction is real, not just temporary. The path isn't about restriction or denial. It's about awareness. Next time you reach for that familiar comfort, pause. Ask yourself, what am I really hungry for right now? Not what you want to consume, but what you want to feel. Not what you want to avoid, but what you want to create. Because here's what I've learned. The very thing you're avoiding might be exactly what you need to heal. The silence you're afraid of might be where your wisdom lives. The discomfort you're numbing might be your power trying to emerge. When you stop running from yourself, you discover something beautiful. You don't need to be fixed or entertained or constantly stimulated. You just need to be met by your own presence, your own kindness, your own truth. And when that happens, pleasure becomes sacred again. Not a drug, but a celebration. Not an escape, but an expression. Not a need, but a choice. You'll still enjoy good food, good company, good experiences, but you'll enjoy them fully without the desperate edge of addiction. You'll laugh deeper because you're not afraid to cry. You'll love stronger because you're not afraid to be alone. You'll feel everything more vividly because you're no longer trying to feel nothing. This is what freedom actually looks like. Not the ability to do whatever you want, but the ability to want what actually serves you. So I'll leave you with this challenge. For the next week, every time you reach for a distraction, pause. Take 3 breaths. Ask yourself what you really need in that moment. You might be surprised by what you discover. You might find that what you really need isn't another hit of dopamine, but a moment of honest self-compassion. And that moment might change everything. Because you are not your cravings. You are not your impulses. You are not your need for constant stimulation. You are the awareness that can choose. You are the presence that can heal. You are the wisdom that knows the difference between what feels good and what is good. And once you remember that, pleasure will never control you again. Instead, you'll use it as it was meant to be used. As a celebration of being fully, authentically, courageously alive.